In the summer of 1980, Pastor Anderson stepped down from pastoring, and the deacon board would begin searching for a new pastor. With the help of Dr. Cedarholm from Maranatha Baptist College, several candidates came, preached for a Sunday, and were voted down. To call a new pastor, the candidate must have 3/4 of the vote.
Several of the men that they had in, I thought that I just really was not excited about them being my future pastor. And the church was in a real struggle, because it was that time where all of those different men, and you got to understand, the church maybe had about 35 people at that time.
Each one was voted down. Even an experienced pastor from Michigan, Pastor Don Rose.
It all started when we were coming from Montana. We were going to Michigan, but we were dropping Cindy off at Maranatha. She was starting college. So we were coming through, and in this process, Lake Mills Church had already contacted Don to come and candidate for that church. So we were right on our way. So we were coming, and we stopped there on Saturday, and we were getting out of the car, and there was like maybe the head deacon, I'm not sure which one, but he came and, "You're Don Rose?" "Yes," he said. He says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We called a pastor last Sunday, but you can preach tomorrow." So he did, and then preached Sunday morning and Sunday night, and then we went going back, took Cindy to Maranatha, and we went back to Michigan. Well, in the process, in Michigan, Dr. Cedarholm called my husband, called Don, and said, "There's a little church in Milwaukee, Faith Baptist Church, that is looking for a pastor. And do you think you could candidate there?" And so he said yes. Well, when we came, now this is a couple Sundays after Cindy had already been in Maranatha, and we came, and it was a very little church. The total, the first time we were there, I think, was 27 in attendance, and that was including everybody, babies in the nursery, everybody. So it was really small, but we enjoyed that. And we were there for Sunday, and I think my husband preached like a Monday and a Tuesday. I'm not sure how many days, but then we went back to Michigan. And funny thing is, when they voted, it wasn't, my husband says usually it has to be 100%. And it wasn't. It was like 2/3. And so we said, that just, for that small crowd, it really wasn't enough. And so we stayed in Michigan. Dr. Cedarholm calls my husband again and says, "I think you ought to go and just be the interim pastor, because they need somebody." And they probably didn't know what they were doing when they made this vote. So
on October 19th, 1980, I assumed the responsibility of interim pastor of the Faith Baptist Church of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. After preaching to the church on several occasions, I was deeply impressed that God wanted me to minister to these dear people. The vote of the church to call me as their pastor fell short of 3/4 vote needed to call a pastor. This left me disappointed and confused. I had full confidence that this was where God wanted me. Now I was frustrated concerning God's will for my life. The deacons of the church proposed the idea of interim pastor. At first, the flesh gave strong negative response. Go to a people that had already rejected you? Never, I reasoned. But God had other plans. The deacons jeopardized their own popularity and continued to ask me to come. Finally, I consented, and great peace came to me and my wife.
Since when does the gospel message become mundane to a Christian? When I study the life of Paul, I study one who always was referring to the gospel message.
As 1980 came to a close, Pastor Rose set out his goals for the next few years of the church. One of them was to grow the families of faith.
He would come by on a Saturday and ask us if we were going to be in church on Sunday. And he had done that on several occasions. And sometimes we would him and haw, and I think sometimes we actually were even dishonest. Um, and he said, well, I remember one Saturday, well, if you don't come to church Sunday and you go to the races, he said, I'm going to put the rose hex on you. And we thought that was funny. And I do remember, though, the next day, sitting at the starting gate of my first race and of the day, and that thought came back to my mind, the rose hex, and sort of laughed it off fearfully. And the crazy thing is, when the gate dropped and my race started, I hadn't traveled about 30, maybe 30 yards, and me and another cycle had come together. I had gone over the handlebars. My cycle had flipped up in the air, landed on me, cracked my ribs, and down in the dirt, I realized, at least I believed God was looking to get my attention.
I remember it coming up to the year of our anniversary, first year, and that meant there was going to be a meeting for calling my husband to be the regular pastor, not just the interim pastor. And so that was something, because it still was, I mean, what will they do? But it was a unanimous vote to keep him as pastor.
Every church that my dad had pastored grew very fast. And I do believe it was because God's anointing on his life, and that he loved the Lord, and he was a dynamic pastor and a preacher.
Another of Pastor Rose's goals was to have 500 in attendance. His desire was to have this goal achieved within 5 years.
And many things my husband put into process during the very beginning, because wasn't long before we started a missions program. That was probably first. And Faith Prowess Missions, which they had been missionaries, but very little. And so then we started a bus ministry.
Dad said to Dean that he would like him to start our bus route. And he was so excited.
Well, I had no idea what a bus captain was. The church did not have a bus ministry. They owned an old bus that didn't run, and from what I understand, in the mid-70s, maybe even picked up a few people on a bus. And the church began to grow, and there was a spirit of excitement, people getting saved and baptized.
With all the people coming in on the buses, there was a real need for more space.
As we grew and needing to have a place for the Sunday school, the South Shore Pavilion was available, and I think we rented it for $75 or something.
The problem was somebody had to stand outside, because the kids, once they saw the lake, they wanted to go to the lake. And we said, no, you have to come to Sunday school.
Oh, it was super fun. Every Sunday we went over to the South Shore Pavilion. We got to do a little running around, which we weren't supposed to. Mrs. Rose was my Sunday school teacher, and I remember her little felt board and always having something new to learn, but it being exciting.
I just never forget her being there teaching every week, and teaching Sunday School Charlie on a flannel graph, and just her faithfulness, and Sunday School Charlie's faithfulness, of course, I think really just taught me the importance of being faithful. And the Bible talks about a faithful man shall abound with blessings, and just simply being faithful is such an underrated aspect of Christianity and Christendom. But I want to take another moment to say thank you to Mrs. Rose.
The church grew, and with that growth came the need for more staff.
Well, I had the privilege of going off to Watertown, Wisconsin, Maranatha Baptist Bible College, after I graduated from the Christian school. So after college, I, of course, had a heart. I wanted to be a youth pastor. And my pastor, who at that time had just become my father-in-law, had expressed he wanted me to work for him. And so Pastor Short had gone to Massachusetts, and so they were preparing to bring me on. And I was working a secular job, still serving in the church. And it was during that time that then they had spoke to me about coming on as the youth pastor. My brother-in-law, Joel, who was the youth pastor, was going to step into the role of assistant pastor.
But as soon as they took over, Pastor Joel and Sue did an amazing job, but we were so loved by Preacher and Sandy. And the one thing that I remember is we were always at their house, and we were always allowed to be. New Year's Eve was always an all-nighter. So after the service ended at midnight, because we used to go until midnight then, welcome in the new year, then all the people would leave and we would go tubing at the Domes at Mitchell Park.
Preacher obviously was a great youth pastor. The single greatest thing that happened during his youth pastorate for me personally was I was led to the Lord by my brother, by our pastor, and at the time my youth pastor.
My office was the men's baptistry changing room. And as we were seeing people baptized, and there was carpet in there, so it was a regular occurrence that on Monday, my carpet was squishy because of the baptisms that took place that Sunday. My brother-in-law's office was straight above me in the loft of the men's baptistry changing room. I remember one day, on the other side of the baptistry was the secretary's office. And so he was going down to the secretary's office, and he tried to scoot by the baptistry, and he slipped and he fell into the baptistry.
The church continued to grow and needed a bigger place to meet. While looking for a gym to rent, Joel Rose drove by a man putting a for sale sign on Don Bosco High School.
He was going on a bus route, and he came by the property of Wind Lake, and there was a for sale sign. And he went in and he said, "My dad wants to buy this building." We had not seen it. We didn't know what it was like. So we came back, and Joel said, "I've got a building. We can have a building." And so my husband went and looked at it. And of course, it was a school, but it had an auditorium. And so the auditorium was also a gym.
Going from Oklahoma to Wind Lake, as a teenager, just like today's teenagers, it was all about basketball, right? So we were in a very tight building there, and space was just at a premium with going off to South Shore and everything for Sunday school. So this was a much bigger building, a much bigger space.
You have to realize this, where we were was extremely small. And for us to walk into this building, it was huge. And how are we going to fill this? But I remember walking around and being so excited to know that my kids are going to grow up in this building. They're going to have games in this building. That brought so much joy to me.
With more room came more growth and many exciting events and ministries.
On Eagle's Wings is designed to give you the spiritual tools to rise above your circumstances and to trust in God's great promises. And now, Dr. Donald M. Rose. On Eagle's Wings has been designed by Faith Baptist Church of Milwaukee. We'd like to extend a special invitation to attend any of our services at our new location, 1170 West Wind Lake Avenue. A nursery and children's church are provided. Tune in next week as Dr. Rose brings another message from God's Word to challenge you to trust in God's great promises and to mount up on wings of eagle.